I was actually gonna try to intro Ryan by saying Capitol Hill.
Capitol Hill. I'll go to Ryan in just a second. Dick quickly has a quick question in Deerfield. What is it there, Dick?
Just wondering, I don't watch baseball much. I watched the World Series last night for the first time this year.
Yeah.
And I didn't see any of the guys kneeling for the national anthem. Is it a rule in baseball, or is it just in football that guys are stupid?
It's really interesting. It seems to be only happening in football. I don't think that has been an issue all season long.
There was one player, I believe a catcher for the Oakland Athletics, who knelt going back about a month, 6 weeks ago. But that's the only incident I'm familiar with. I will mention this again, though. It was not often talked about, but former Met and Blue Jays player Carlos Delgado apparently always sat during the anthem. He had some type of objection to the way we either handled the situation or handled foreign, but it never became like front page news.
Yeah.
He felt how he felt. He wasn't looking for attention, and this is going back 10 years ago.
Let's do
now.
an experiment. Let's see if the president can tweet out the one person that isn't standing in baseball and see if it turns into an issue. Because that's probably what would happen. So, all right, Dick, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, NBA and MLB, this has not been an issue.
No. Ryan Nobles, good morning. Ryan, good morning.
Bill, I was worried when you bumped me yesterday that you hadn't forgiven me yet for what we talked about.
Let's see, what was the line? Let's see, the most expensive holiday for Bill and his kids is Mother's Day. I thought
that wasn't my joke.
Oh, was that Griffo's joke?
Yeah.
I never heard that because somebody was next to me talking the whole time.
Yeah, that was
Joe.
That was funny. Anyway, you did a great job, Ryan. I thought you were really funny.
Well, we had a great time. Carrie had a great time as well. It was great to see so many of our friends from Central New York, and let's do it again next year. Maybe Jeff could be. We'll roast Jeff next year. I'll actually come up with a joke for Jeff.
I don't know. Jeff hasn't quite forgiven you from the fact that you didn't do a joke for him and said that's just because you're uninteresting.
I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, that's okay.
It was good. It was very good.
I do have to say that comedy writing is exhausting. I had to take a nap for the next 3 days after that. It's not easy at all.
It's
funny.
So much,
I did too.
It's so much easier. Yeah, you did. It's so much easier to write news, isn't it? Because it's made up for you. That's there. It's sitting there on a silver platter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say that my job's a lot easier, but I after experiencing that, I'm glad that I chose a path of covering news and journalism than my brother is a stand-up comedian, and
right.
and so I talked to him actually last night about it. And I said I have newfound respect for your chosen career path because that is not easy, very difficult.
Yeah. And you get to read from a teleprompter. The comedians, they've most often they're just up there memorizing that act. Okay, Ryan, what? So now we have the president talking about the Democrats, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party tied to this dossier, maybe even funded it. This is getting even more and more twisted and complicated.
Well, I think that the White House has found an opening here. Frankly, I think there was long thought for some time that the Democrats played some role in the funding of this research into this dossier. We didn't know how high up the levels went and exactly which Democrats were funding it, but that was not necessarily the revelatory piece of information that came out about this report. The thing that was interesting that it was directly from the DNC and the Hillary Clinton campaign that continued funding it. And, one of the big things that Donald Trump's accused of is, working with foreign governments to play a role in this election. And even though this was an American group, Fusion GPS, which the Democrats funded, which was initially a Republican group that was funding them, there were foreign agents involved in the collection of this information about President Trump. And that dossier, well, parts of it have been confirmed by intelligence sources. A lot of it has not been able to be proven. And there's no doubt that it played some role in the election. So, I heard some Democratic explanations for this yesterday. Brian Fallon, who was Hillary Clinton's spokesperson during the campaign, saying, well, if it got the information that we were looking for, then it was worth the money. And, I think for a lot of people, you hear that and you think, well, okay, so you're saying as long as you do it, it's okay.
Yeah.
And, I think it does cast somewhat of a kind of a dark cloud over the Democratic role in all of this. And I think that's exactly the opening that Donald Trump and Republicans need when they defend the president and what his actions were during the campaign.
Right. Is it different that you're dealing with Brits versus Russians?
I mean, I think it is, yes.
Yeah.
There's also another big difference, too. And the other big difference is, was the Russian government specifically directly tied to Donald Trump and his campaign? And, you know, when you say Vladimir Putin, was Vladimir Putin directly involved? That's a little bit different than a former British intelligence officer who actually has worked for the FBI before and is well known to the intelligence community. It's not as if the Queen was instructing him to do this.
Well,
but we have to say, though, you know, the evidence has not specifically tied Donald Trump to the Russian government yet. There's certainly a lot of smoke billowing out of that, but the fire has not been revealed yet. So I guess I'm not trying to create a moral equivalency here. I'm just saying this is the kind of thing that Donald Trump can use to his advantage when he's arguing against these charges against him.
And that's exactly what he's doing right now. And then on top of that, you have this this uranium deal that Hillary says that's already been debunked, but there are claims that the Russian government contributed to Hillary's campaign after that deal was struck. But of course, that was when she was Secretary of State.
This is where it gets complicated, right? Because it's a subsidiary of a subsidiary that's actually an American company but has direct Russian ties. I mean, there's certainly a fact here that this deal went down during the Obama administration, and there were some contributions made to her, you know, if you follow the pipeline of money. Now, whether or not that had a direct influence on the decision, I guess, is something that still needs to be decided. But again, it's this little drip kind of things that Donald Trump can kind of point to and say, you're saying that I'm such a problem here. What about all the interactions that the Democrats have had with the Russians as well?
How about the tax deal? This tax reform? We'll get to the civil war that seems to be, which the president is calling a love fest, but it looks like some sort of a civil war. We'll get to that. But is the president going to have Republican support, and can they bring some Democrats along here to make this a little more bipartisan?
Well, I think it's largely going to be a Republican plan if it ever gets passed. Maybe you'll get one or two Democrats that'll cross over because they're in at-risk states, on the Senate side. Maybe somebody like Joe Manchin from West Virginia says that he'll vote for it, but it'll largely be a Democratic plan. But, you know, New Yorkers, I think specifically, are the ones that have got to pay a very close attention to this debate. And there's this thing called the SALT tax deduction, which is the state and local tax deduction, which New Yorkers, and I remember benefiting from this, benefit from in a big way. And that's essentially a deduction on your federal income tax that allows you to deduct your state and local taxes. And as you guys know, New Yorkers are taxed at a much higher level at the state and local level than most people are around the country. Now, in the initial kind of broad principles plan that the Republican Party has issued, that deduction would go away.
Yeah. And
there are upstate Republicans, and I'm sure the members of Congress that represent your area, that are very much opposed to getting rid of that deduction. And while that's a specific example of how that's going to impact people in one area, there are hundreds of examples of these deductions and credits that people across the country benefit from in their tax plan. And while everyone kind of broadly supports the idea of tax reform and lower taxes, when it starts to hit you specifically and you're looking at your 401k, when you start to look at your IRS tax file, and you say, wait a second, I always got that deduction. Why am I not getting it anymore?
Right.
I think that's where you're going to start to see some problems with this as it goes down the road. And I think it's going to take time. It's not going to happen at the end of the year. It's going to be at least 6 months, maybe even longer, before we even see a bill voted on.
All right, I want to talk to you about the other issue, and that is, it seems like there's such huge issues every day. It almost seems like months ago that we were talking about Jeff Flake and talking about Bob Corker and others that have come out and said some really, I've had people say, come on, this is just typical politics. No, I don't ever remember anything like this. And, oh, by the way, Flake calling the president reckless, outrageous, undignified. Right after I'm watching that, there's a commercial that comes on, and there's a Democrat urging people to stand up and impeach this president. A commercial on television. These are unprecedented times. Tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong, Bill. And I tweeted that out after Flake's speech the other day. And in fact, we were driving home from upstate New York, and I had to watch it on my phone because I thought it was so incredible.
Yeah.
And this is, another example of how this thing never happened. And Flake even said that in his speech. We need to stop for a moment and say to ourselves, this is not the normal. We can't allow this to become the normal. And the idea that you'd have two prominent Republican senators who are going to the floor of the Senate and are going live on television and being so as critical of Donald Trump as any Democrat has been.
Well, and not just critical on policy. This was critical. This is taking a swipe at the president's decency and ability to run the country. I mean, I've never seen anything like this before.
It's never been like this. But as much as that is unprecedented, Bill, I'll also have to tell you that in many respects it helps Donald Trump.
Yeah.
When you look at the brass tacks of what's happened here, you have two of his leading critics in the Republican Senate who have now said that they're not going to run for re-election. Donald Trump considers that a win.
Right.
One of Steve Bannon's allies told one of our reporters at CNN that they just view this as another scalp, that they've won another victory here. And there's actually a better chance, perhaps, that Republicans hold on to that seat in Arizona now that Jeff Flake decided not to run because of his issues with the president. His approval rating in that state had gone down quite a bit, and Donald Trump is very popular in Arizona.
Yeah.
So, this is, I think there are a lot of Republican senators who are taking a principled stand here, but then there's a whole other group of Republicans who still see that the president has an 85% approval rating with Republicans. He's still holding on to that 38 to 42% of support with Americans, and that has not budged since he got elected. And they see this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually get something done like tax reform. I'm talking about Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really change all that much. So even though you have this dramatic speech on the floor of the Senate, Mark Preston, one of our political analysts, said that children in schools should have watched it in their civics classes the next day, it may not really change the dynamics all in Washington, and perhaps that's even the most incredible thing about all of this.
Well, here's the conundrum, and that is that I don't care if you're in a moderate district or you're down in Arizona. The problem is that through gerrymandering, these primaries are such an obstacle for any moderate. And in order to get what it means is, where do these moderates go? They're not going to be able to win primaries. Are they going to become independents? Are they going to become Democrats? Because I don't think there's room for them, especially if they oppose this president.
Well, it seems in many respects that the Republican Party is changing in a big way. When you have somebody like Jeff Flake, who has like a 95% approval rating from the American Conservative Union, this is a guy that checks all the conservative boxes. And if he's not conservative enough for this Republican Party, this is a Republican Party that's changed dramatically. It's not the Republican Party of even 5-6 years ago. It's not John McCain, George W. Bush, or Mitt Romney's Republican Party. This is a new Republican Party. And Bill, you're talking about gerrymandering, which is what affects congressional districts, but Jeff Flake was running statewide in Arizona. But the effects of gerrymandering go beyond just these individual congressional districts, because as a result, because the way these races are run, we are now all hardening our political positions, where we used to be open to compromise, and the sensibilities of the average voter were that you wanted to see people who work together. What these hard right and hard left primary contests have created is a new political environment where it's all or nothing. I want a candidate that's never going to compromise on any issue, and that's why you see, even in statewide races, even though it doesn't have any effect on gerrymandering, that you see a new kind of political culture that exists. And I agree with you. I don't think that it's good for the American people, but this is the position we find ourselves in.
Well, and let's not forget, the reason Hillary Clinton is not president, we can say all we want that it's about she just wasn't a good candidate, and probably that's very true. But it is that Bernie Sanders wing, that extreme wing of the Democrat Party, that caused the same thing. No one was excited about her. There was a divide in the party.
And the exact same problem exists on the Democratic side.
Yeah.
And that's why there's a very good chance that Donald Trump will be a reelected president, because the Democrats, as much as the Republicans are in focus here, Tom Perez, the DNC chairman right now, is dealing with all kinds of strife within his leadership. He pushed out a number of top lieutenants in the DNC who were Bernie Sanders acolytes. So as soon as the election starts, right after the 2018 midterms, Democrats are going to put on a brave face here and try and stay united so they can win back the House. But after that, the 2020 campaign is going to be underway, and Bernie Sanders is going to run. And so these Democrats are going to be in a very similar situation as they try and fight for the soul of their party. And that means that Donald Trump is in a very good position if something doesn't change with the Democratic Party very soon.
Moderate and liberal, call them liberal Republicans, far more left-leaning Republicans, moderate and more right-leaning Democrats. Is there a new party that's going to form after this next presidential election that finds a place for somebody in the middle?
I mean, I think it would be very hard to do because of the infrastructure that's that is required to pull something like that together. I mean, I think that I think there might be the will to do that, but you have to keep in mind, Bill, the average American doesn't spend all day thinking about politics, but the people on the far fringes of both parties do spend every minute talking about politics.
Yeah.
So they're the ones that know when all the filing deadlines take place. They're the ones who know how the petition process works. They're the ones that know when you have to have everything in place to get a candidate on the ballot. And so that's why it's so difficult to run outside the infrastructure of these two entrenched parties. I'm not saying it can't ever happen, but you're talking about, a more than 100-year legacy with the Republican and Democratic parties. You can't just topple that in one election cycle.
3 comments for you, Ryan. First of all, Rob says, GOP don't let Dems define the party and who we are. Interesting. Jack says, they are so wonderful they can't get reelected. How funny. There's a little sarcasm there. And finally, Joe Griffo says, I can't believe you told that joke. I don't know where that came from. I don't know where that came from, Ryan. I don't know.
I think we know what he's talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. Ryan Noble, CNN. We'll talk again next week. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the week.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.